Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you are watching this. I do hope it finds you well. My name is John, and I am an author, and I'm coming to you here on another Storytime Thursday to read the ninth chapter of my first book, The Shadow of the Past, available on Amazon and linked below, entitled The Long Road North. Mm. So you did speak true when you said you would enter the tower, growled Brawl as Val'inar strode once more into the center of the chamber. You were beginning to wonder if the door had consumed you. Why would you think the door had consumed me? Inquired the elf. We saw you place your hands upon the door and pass through the metal and vanish, replied one of the Uxtra. That was several hours ago. I passed through the door and into the tower beyond, and it took some time to climb the tower and search for these materials. And you have brought all that you have promised, grunted Brawl. And something more. Something more, said Val'inar. Yes, responded the goblin, pointing firmly at his chest. I see you have stolen yourself a nice piece of armor. Did you really think we would not notice that you had it on? Or was taking that your real purpose here? My purpose for entering the tower was to retrieve these items that you and the graphic dwarves would not go to war, stated the elf heatedly. I happened to find this piece of armor, which was clearly designed for one of my race, and thought it might come in useful on my journey. But you are still taking something without leave from our tower, growled Broll, approaching Val'inar with a look of anger on his face. When the goblin was less than a yard from the elf, he suddenly began laughing. Soon after, all the goblins in the room joined in uproarious laughter. Val'inar looked puzzled. Take the armor, elfling, laughed Brawl. You have certainly earned it for opening our eyes to a more dangerous anyway. Anyways, you said that armor would be of little use to even the largest soldier I command. Thank you, said Val'inar, smiling at last. And here are the items which I promised you. It is we who should thank you for bringing us these plans in the heart of flame, responded Brawl. They will be of great aid to us, especially if war is really ahead. They certainly will be, said Val'inar. And now, with your leave, I would like to return with all speed to Medil to present what I promised the dwarves to Narthan and then proceed on my journey. You have my leave to go and will be welcome among the Krelvan should you ever return, replied Brawl, bowing his head to the elf. We will send new envoys to the dwarves and perhaps our armies, and prepare our armies to face the Union. I counsel that you make your preparation as discreetly as possible, said Val'inar, returning the bow. Our enemy's sight is far, and it would be best not to show our hand until we are ready. Brawl nodded at this. Where do your journeys take you next? North to the Duchy of Ramalda, replied Val'inar, and noting the look of concern on the goblin's face, added, It is my understanding that their adherence to the Union is not yet great, and they would be a useful ally if I can gain their support. It would be a blow to the Union if they lose that duchy, mused Brawl, strucking his chin in thoughts. After a moment, he seemed to shake himself out of his thoughts, smiled, and said, May you fare well on your travels. I thank you, bowed the elf once more, and I hope that our paths may cross again. With that, Val'inar was led from the council chambers by two guard, and once outside, he was handed off to a group of scouts who were to conduct him back to Medil. It was twilight by the time they exited the city, and night fell before it was blocked from sight by the first of the many tunnels that they would have to pass through. The goblins he was traveling with now were clearly more used to covering ground at great speed, judging by their pace and endurance, than the guards who had conducted him to Matra. Regardless of their great endurance, the scouts were still forced to take a rest around noon the following day at a guard post which Val'inar judged to be about halfway to Medil. His estimate proved correct as they arrived at the meeting room around dawn of the following day. Val'inar was alone in the chamber for nearly an hour while both Narthan and Urgar were roused. Both were surprised at the speed which Val'inar had returned with all that he had promised. Once the shock had worn off from Dwarf and Goblin, it took surprisingly little time to work out the basic details of a truce between the two peoples. Both sides agreed to a temporary alliance with specific details to be arranged by way of envoy. Additionally, it was agreed that both sides would send emissaries to the Tri to include them in this military alliance. Well, it's settled then, said Narthen, leaning back in his chair, the couriers bearing the signed copies of the tentative truce having just left. Yesterday I would not have thought this possible, but you have somehow made it happen, Val'inar. The old grievances may never die, but I suppose sometimes there are bigger things to worry about. Yes, said Urgar. You have done much for us, elf. Is there some way in which we can return your aid? Yes. Prepare for war and be ready when I send word that the time of battle is at hand. We will indeed do that, replied the goblin, but where are you going now? I head north to the Duchy of Ramalda, where it is my hope that I will be able to gain their aid as well. That would indeed be a severe blow to the Union, responded the dwarf. And what tasks will you both undertake? Once I return to your Lord Irkle, I shall beg his leave to travel to the Manaran dwarves. Where are they located? Inquired the elf. They live in the Dresh Mountains in the east, replied the dwarf. They are the southwestern border of the Telmaran Union. What purpose would that serve? Asked Urgar. Strife has long divided our people, and the Union has cut what little trade there was, came Narthen's response. But our last report said that the Union was making threatening moves on them, and if I could re-establish the connection, they will prove useful. That would indeed be of great help, said Val'inar. But how will you get there without the Union detecting you? From what I gathered from the information you provided me, the land between is controlled by the Union. There is a secret road that runs between our two clans, replied Narfin. It has long been so dangerous that none dared venture there, but it is unlikely that the Union knows anything of it. With luck, I will be able to reach Hran, the Minaran capital, without being detected. If you survive the journey, grunted Urgar, before you leave, I will provide you with a pair of Partick stones, which will allow near instant communication between your two sundered clans. Assuming you are able to reach the Dresh Mountains with one half of the device, I will also give you half of another Partick so you may communicate with the elf and myself on our journey. That is very generous of, said Val'inar as Narthen bowed low before he realized what the goblin had said. What do you mean, our journey? The scouts that led you here brought an order from Slowbrag Brawl, responded Urgar, brandishing a small piece of parchment. It orders me to accompany you upon your journey. Why does he want you with me? He feels that, now that we have joined you, we have a vested interest in aiding you in your journey to undermine the Union, replied Urgar, and thus he wished me to accompany you. It will be extremely dangerous, said the elf. I doubtless have many hunting me. I am well aware of that, responded the goblin in an even tone. Do not waste your breath. Nothing you say will stop me going, and if you try to leave without me, I shall simply follow you. What is more, I believe that I will be of use to you. You will be playing games of politics of which I have much experience, and I am not without power and magical skill myself, even if I cannot compete with you. Val'inar sighed and after a moment or so nodded his assent. He knew what the goblin said was true and that he would certainly need help. Urgar then had three small cases brought forward. Inside each case was a pair of small metal rings with a complex web of strings within each ring. Urgar explained that the complex enchantment had been placed on each pair of rings so that if one were to hold one in hand, pass a current of air through the strings and speak into it, its twin would resonate with the same sound. Narthen took one case and one of the rings from another, and Val'inar took its double. Urgar took one from the last case and ordered its twin be taken with all speed back to Brawl. With that, Narthen made his farewells to both Urgar and Val'inar and hurried off. Once he and his guards had departed, Urgar returned to Val'inar and asks, So, when is it that you intend on leaving for the north? It has been several days since I slept, so we shall plan our journey today and leave in the morning, responded Val'inar. Very well, I will conduct you to the Goblin Fortress that I can fill you in on what I know of Ramalda. We can prepare for our journey and then rest, said Urgar. But don't even think about trying to sneak away in the middle of the night. I will have guards posted to make sure of that, and even if you manage to get past them, I doubt you will find your way out of the mountains without a guide. Val'inar laughed and held up his hands defensively. Do not worry, I welcome your aid on my journey. It took about an hour to arrive at the goblin fortress, and after a simple meal of dried meat and coarse bread, Urgar filled Val'inar in about the political climate of Ramalda as far as he understood it. Ramalda had just joined the Union, though the nobles were divided on the matter due to the long enmity between the Ramaldans and the city-states that formed the Union core. The Union had been delicate so far in their dealings with Ramalda, but the rumor was that the Duke was a reluctant follower at best. Both Urgar and Val'inar agreed that, based on what they knew about the Union, that it was only a matter of time before they took more direct control. After this long discussion, Val'inar enjoyed the view from the top of the fortress for a few hours before eating a dinner of goblin stew. He was then shown to a simple straw mattress to sleep. Urgar apologized that they did not have better accommodations, but it would have taken time to prepare a bed that was long enough for him. Val'inar was awakened just before dawn the following morning by a goblin sentry and informed him that his pack and water skin had been replenished from the goblin stores. He joined the guards for their morning meal, which consisted of a thick gruel and water. There wasn't much taste to it, but it was hearty. Urgar arrived at the table about halfway through the meal. Gone were his red robes, as well as any sign that he was anything more than just another goblin. He wore a loose-fitting tunic and leggings colored brown, as well as a sturdy pair of leather boots. He also wore a well-made vest of leather and a brown cloak upon his back. Round his waist was a goblin scimitar and a simple brown sheath, as well as a small iron knife. He placed his own pack next to Valinar's, which was sitting against the wall near the entrance of the room, and proceeded to join in the meal. Once they had both finished eating, Elf and Goblin double-checked their packs before strapping them on their backs and setting off. They traveled through a tunnel for a short time before emerging onto a path that led down from the mountain. The path was quite narrow and made many twists and turns. Nonetheless, they made consistent progress downwards. It took the better part of the day, but by evening they reached the end of the stony peaks, and after eating their evening meal at a goblin village and outpost, set off into the Joran forest. It was well after nightfall before Val'inar and Urgar decided that they should rest for a few hours. They prepared a fire, and after eating a light meal of simple biscuits and cured meat, they settled down to get a few hours' sleep before the sun rose. Val'inar found himself standing once more in open plains that were surrounded in the distance by mountain ranges. Before him was the deep gouge in the earth that had haunted his dreams so often in the previous weeks. It was small, maybe only 20 feet across, but the pit in the ground looked like it went down for some great distance, and the walls looked burnt as if ravaged by fire. There was something about it that seemed distinctly unnatural. As Val'inar stood examining the pit, he saw it change. It began to grow wider and wider, and yet he seemed to be always remain the same distance from it. Even more strangely, the mountains in the distance seemed to get further away. It also seemed to get shallower as it got wider, although it was hard to tell for sure because the bottom was still beyond his sight. As the pit expanded, Val'inar heard the cruel laughter of Ushara, which was, after a moment, joined by a deeper tone, more mirthful perhaps, but with a sharper edge. Val'inar awoke with a start and, breathing heavily, quickly sat up. He was drenched in cold sweat. He had not had any dreams for about a week. It always amazed him how easily he forgot just how vivid and disturbing the visions could be. There was something distinctly malevolent about that pit. He could not shake the feeling that much rode on his finding out what that pit was. He also knew beyond the merest shadow of a doubt that he had to stop that pit from expanding, regardless of the cost. "What shadows trouble your dreams, Val'inar?" inquired Urgar, who had been roused from his slumber by the cry of shock Val'inar had given when he saw the pit opening before him. "I keep dreaming of a great pit that looks rather like a wound in the earth," replied the elf. "There is something about it that seems unnatural, and after I have been staring at it for some time, it seems to open up before me. I do not know what it is or what it means. I only know that I must find out what it is and stop it opening." What will happen if you do not stop it opening?" "Doom for all," responded Val'inar, and noticed the goblin's surprised expression, and added, "I know not how, but I feel certain that all will be doomed if it opens." "Do you know where this pit in the earth is?" inquired the goblin, sitting up and beginning to repack his gear. "It is in the midst of a great plain surrounded by mountains, but I do not know where," said Val'inar. "It is definitely not the Shaddai plains. Those plains are barren and these plains are barren and desolate. Only a little of the hardiest grass grows there, and I saw no evidence that animals had been there for many years. It sounds like you are describing the Iroquois Deadlands, remarked Urgar. It is a vast plain that lies east of here. It is surrounded by the northern spur of the Orthrus Mountains to the west, the Dresh Mountains to the south, the Karanar lowland to the east, and the Karnas Mountains to the north. None live there, or have lived there for many years, because the soil cannot support crops or enough grass to feed herds of animals. That is some leagues to the east. How do you know so much of it? Inquired the elf as he too repacked his gear. Officially, the entirety of the Deadlands belongs to the Union. Its heartland is the realm in and east of the Karanar lowlands, replied Urgar. It also features heavily among the ancient legends of my people. It is said that long ago a great war was fought there, and the great expenditure of magic caused the land to die. It is also said that this war began the degradation of my people and marked the disappearance of yours. Upon hearing this, a realization came upon Val'inar so suddenly that he slowly sat down upon the ground before saying breathlessly, "It's Karal's prison." Kiral? Inquired Urgar, surprised by the outburst. Kiral was an evil mage who tried to conquer this terror. He had power in every element and was opposed by 6 powerful elemental mages as well as 6 great realms. The war lasted thousands of years, and in the end, the 6 elements mental mages managed to bind Kiral and remove his evil from the world. Ushara is trying to free him. The malevolence she spreads is not only feeding the anger of all the denizens of Serana, it also might be a tool to free him from his prison. Urgar stared at him in surprise for several minutes before continuing to speak. How do you know so much about what happened so long ago? Like Kiral, the elemental mages yet live, and I have met 2 of them, and part of my quest is to meet the other 4. Indeed, the fire elemental, Shaniri, resides within Matra, and much of the information I have obtained about the war I got from her. That is extraordinary. I assume that it was also the Shaniri that gave you the chest plate that you now bear. Other than providing information necessary for you to complete your task, have they given you anything else? And if they opposed Kiral before, why are they not doing so now? You are correct, it was Shaniri that bestowed this armor upon me, and along with that gift she also enhanced my powers in the discipline of fire. Unfortunately, however, that is the limit of the help she could provide, as the malevolence has sapped the elementals of the great majority of their power. If they were so powerful, how did they not realize what was happening and put a stop to it? The evil of Kirals is very well thought out. It grew slowly at first and was beyond the perception of even the elementals. By the time it made itself apparent, they were, even together, unable to fight it. That was the point where Ushara stepped in, formed the Union, and began spreading the malevolence to each group of people across the Terra. Then why are we fighting to stop this Union? Why not go straight for Ushara and hope that malevolence dies with her? This evil is not of her making, she is just a channel for it, and I have been informed that Ushara has powers far greater than even mine. We would have little chance of defeating her directly. The Union is a better target, as the alliance which we need to form would do the exact opposite of what the evil in the Union are trying to accomplish by uniting the races and helping them to work together in spite of their differences. Also, the removal of the Union will allow us to focus on building up our defenses for Kiral if we cannot prevent his escape from his ancient bonds. Then let us hurry north with all speed. Every day may be crucial if we are to return the Ramaldans to our cause, and we will need their army and navy. It will take more than their martial and naval forces to swing the contest in our favor, but nevertheless, let us move swiftly in hopes that with quick action we might aid our cause before the Union has a chance to block us. With that, Elf and Goblin quickly strapped their packs to their backs and set off once more. As the ground was still sloping downward, they made quick progress, and within a few hours they were deep within the Jorn forest. This forest was not so thick or forbidding as Taranu, nor were the animals which inhabited it as dangerous, but it was much larger. Upon inquiry, Val'inar learned that the forest was inhabited by both goblins in the south and humans in the north. There had been conflicts over control of the forest's resources, but none in the past generation. The fame of the forest was that it was out of the wood of Joran that the Ramaldans built their vast fleets. The various glens, dales, and valleys in the forest were scattered with villages, outposts, cabins, and even some farmsteads. Urgar indicated that there was even some areas in which goblins and humans lived and worked side by side, although as a rule a thin strip of neutral ground was maintained with soldiers stationed to observe each other. Even once the ground leveled off, the travelers made quick progress through the woods, and thanks to the sharp eyes of the elf, were able to avoid the Ramaldan settlements once they reached them. Both figured that it would be better if they arrived in Ramalda without having their presence announced, especially if the Union had warned the Ramaldans about Val'inar. Avoiding watchful eyes was easy for about a week, but after that their progress began to slow, as they had to move ever more carefully to avoid detection as the settlements grew closer together. The spring weather stayed pleasant and cool on the whole, with only one day of rain. After a further week's travel, another challenge was added of avoiding the lumber camps which the Ramaldans had set up to provide for their navy's constant need of wood, and the roads which now staked their way through the forest. Due to the foresting, the trees were much further spaced. Unfortunately, it made avoiding detection all the more difficult. On the first night after they got to the area of Joran where the trees began thinning, Urgar produced two thick worn tunics. He pointed that it was now all but impossible to avoid being seen entirely, and it would look suspicious of two strangers to walk in from the wilderness armed and armored as if for battle. Val'inar therefore placed the tunic over his chest plate, making sure that it was tied tightly enough around his neck that it would not be seen. He also removed his arm guards and replaced them in the pack. He carefully positioned his sword on his back so that his cloak and hood covered it, but he could nevertheless get to it if he needed to. It was another 3 days before the travelers finally emerged from the Joran forest. They found themselves upon a hill which was high enough so that even Urgar could clearly see the Hiran Sea about 5 days' distance before them. Ramalda was a hilly land with fertile soil, rich in resources, and with much of it bordering the sea. They also controlled a large number of islands which lay just to the north of the continent. More than half their southern border to the east was taken up by the Karnas Mountains, so that the only way of approaching it by land was through the Joran forests, which they controlled, and in the east by the Larada grasslands, a small strip of land between the mountains and the sea, which was dominated by several fortresses built by the Ramaldans. Beyond the fortresses lay the Union, which had built fortifications of their own. Val'inar and Urgar left the eaves of Joran very near a walled city of respectable size called Keldor, which served as the main hub for the wood harvested from Joran to be shipped to the rest of Ramalda. They were careful to avoid the city, not wanting to attract attention, and move through the farmland which lay beyond. They were making for Gyrodar, the ancient capital city of the duchy, where they would be able to get the best indication of where the Ramaldans stood in their relations to the Union, and would from there be able to plan how they were going to turn the Ramaldans to their cause. In this matter, they continued for several days, and at the end of the third, they rested for the night in an open field with Gyrodar just in sight. The Hiran Sea was now very close to them as the city stood upon the edge of the water and served as the main port for the duchy's massive merchant and war fleets. They were at the end of their rations, but that did not concern them, as they could easily acquire more in the city when they entered it the following day. They therefore went ahead and ate the last of the biscuits, which were now very dry, as well as most of what remained of the cured meats. They camped themselves within a few yards of a stream so they could consume as much water as they wished. About an hour before dawn, Val'inar awoke with a start. This time, however, it was not because of an ill-omened dream. He opened his eyes. As he opened his eyes, he saw that he had been roused by the sound of a squad of soldiers putting Urgar in shackles. The soldiers were clearly unaware that he had woken up, so he tried to use that to his advantage. He bent his will toward the dying embers of the fire and made them burst alive again, which startled the soldiers. He then caused an upheaval in the ground which knocked those closest to him off their feet, as he jumped to his and made for the soldiers shackling the struggling goblin. As he did so, he reached for his sword only to discover that it was not there. The moment of hesitation proved to be a moment too long, as without warning, Val'inar felt a sharp blow to the back of his knees by the butt of a spear. He was then knocked onto his back, and before he could move, the soldier had placed her boot upon his chest, and as he struggled to move it, she placed the tip of her spear at Valinar's throat. Two other soldiers quickly grabbed him and dragged him to his feet. Valinar struggled, but without the arm guards, he was no match for the strength of humans. Shackles were put on him as well. As soon as he saw the soldiers, Valinar had contemplated fighting back with all of his magical skill, but one of the first things he noticed was that the guards wore tabards which were a pale green and bore a silver eagle perched, wings spread atop the mast of a ship. As much as he felt that it would have been better not to enter Gyrodar in shackles, he decided that he could not afford to go killing Ramaldan soldiers. Judging by the fact that he made no move to defend himself either, it seemed clear that Urgar had reached the same conclusion. The female soldier who had knocked Val'inar down approached the shackled travelers and removed her helmet, asked, "Who do we have here?" "I am an elf who seeks to see something of this fair land of yours," replied Val'inar. "And I travel with him to seek trading opportunities," answered Urgar. The soldier did not reply right away, but instead studied each of them carefully as if she were trying to size them up. The soldier looked to be in her mid-20s. She had a long face with a strong jawline, a high forehead, and wide eyes. Her eyes were a deep green, and they burned with an energetic fire. She had a look of grim determination and duty upon her face, and her eyes seemed to be always trying to find some truth hidden within those she stared at, although she was unable to match theirs long with Validar. She was of average height and very athletic build. Her most noticeable feature was her flaming red and curly hair, which she had cut fairly short down to her shoulders and was carefully tied back. The way she stood and held her spear indicated that she was a veteran warrior. All of the soldiers wore steel chest plates which covered their shoulders, and a tunic of chainmail and one of cloth underneath, and leather leggings. They had plated shin and arm guards as part of their thick leather boots and gloves. They each wore a plated helm with an open face and carried long and thick spears. The female soldier's armor seemed of better quality than the others. In addition to the spear, she bore a sword with an ornate handle at her side. "My lady, forgive me for asking, but are these who we are bade to look for by Magister Horthar?" Horthal inquired one of the soldiers standing guard by Urgar, confirming Valinar's guess that the woman was in charge. "They certainly seem to be," replied the woman, "although we were told to expect an elf and a dwarf, not an elf and a goblin. Regardless, these certainly seem to fit the descriptions of those that man asked us to search for." "What do we do with them, my lady?" inquired another soldier. "Well, are they secure?" responded the woman. Upon getting a affirmative response, she turned to Val'inar and Narthan. "Rise and proceed with us, and make no attempt to escape. You are now prisoners of House Patral." "I was not aware that we had done anything wrong," remarked Val'inar. "That is not what our union advisor says," replied the woman, although Val'inar noted that she seemed to spit the words union advisor. Seeing the look of worry upon their faces, she gave a grim smile and said, "Welcome to Ramalda." And with that, they headed out towards Gyrodar. That is the conclusion of Chapter 9. Let me know what you think. What do you think of my reading, the plot of the story, the voices, which I know I keep changing. I need to make those consistent at some point, and everything else. I do hope you check out my book. It is available on Amazon, linked below, as is my second book, The Shadow of the Past, also linked below. Check it out, like, share, subscribe, comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love for you to share this. Check out my books, check out my socials, all of that down below. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, get a chance to do or experience something creative, and I'll catch you on the next one.